The Where Our Minds Wander podcast may contain sensitive content and explicit language. Listener discretion is advised.
Greetings, fellow wanderers, to the places our minds wander.
The house at the end of the dirt road, where disembodied voices whisper and strange sounds make the living shiver.
Where shadows lurk at the edge of the woods, just outside your back door. And mysterious lights speed beyond reason across the clear night sky.
Odd events throughout time that lead you down the rabbit hole.
I'm Wes.
And I'm Beth.
And this is Where Our Minds Wander. Hello and welcome to Where Our Minds Wander, all you fellow wanderers. Thank you for joining us. We hope you all had a wonderful holiday.
Yes, we do. And we had mentioned last episode that we were ready for some rest and relaxation. And we were actually ahead with episodes ready to record. But then we both got sick. So we were ahead, but then we weren't. So here it is, Christmas night, and we're recording, but, that's okay.
Yeah, you did get me sick because you brought home those germs from all your germy kids at school.
Well, yeah, I did. And I'm still dealing with a lot of congestion, so I apologize if my voice isn't its usual melodious tone.
Yeah, it was definitely a rough start to our vacation, but like they say, the show must go on.
That they do.
So, get your favorite beverage, get comfy, and Beth, ladies first, so why don't you get us started?
You're calling me a lady?
You caught that.
I appreciate it. I don't mind going first since I always go first. But thank you for making it sound like you're doing something gentlemanly, chivalrous. On this Christmas day.
Are you serious on this Christmas day? Wow. I think that's 24/7.
Oh, you're chivalrous 24/7?
Well, pretty much.
And a partridge in a pear tree?
Right. Well, I grew up old school.
Right.
I'm a little old.
You do always hold the doors open for me anytime we go somewhere, which is very nice.
Yeah, I even put the toilet seat up for you.
I never got that. I don't care if the toilet seat's up. I'm not one of those people that complain about it. Like, I go in and I put it back down. I don't complain about it. I mean, what's the big deal?
Yeah, it's only the flick of a wrist, really. You just got to move your arm a little bit.
I know, and I don't understand people that are like, you left the toilet seat up. Big deal. Just put it back down before you sit down.
That's why I leave it up for you, because it empowers you to put that toilet seat down.
It empowers me.
Yeah.
Yes, because I'm a lady and I should go first.
Right.
Well.
Are you ready to get started?
Yes, I was about to.
Well, let's get into it, Beth.
As you know, this time of year, we're pretty used to all kinds of precipitation falling from the sky. In just the last week or two, we've had lots of rain, bouts of sleet, a little bit of snow, and it's par for the course where we live. But once in a while, in various places, things have showered down from the sky that caused some concern. Like rocks, for example. On October 13th, 1901, in Harrisonville, Ohio, a small boulder crashed through resident Zach Dye's window. Now, I'm sure Mr. Dye suspected that some angry or prankster neighbor had just vandalized his house, but when he rushed outside, he couldn't see anyone. Perhaps he boarded up his window and spent the next few hours disgruntled and suspicious. But within the next few days, the entire town of Harrisonville experienced something even more bewildering. Bewildering. It's a wildebeest. That's bewildered. I swear we have not been drinking eggnog.
No, she just laughs at her own stuff all the time.
I don't even remember how I said it. Anyway, they all experienced something even more bewildering. Despite a perfectly clear blue sky, small stones and even bigger rocks began to fall on their homes, businesses, and streets, in their yards and in their fields. They immediately suspected hooligans, and the town rounded up every male, from young boys to old men. And yet, the rocks still fell.
You mean it wasn't those hooligans?
I think it's so cool that they rounded up every male in the town just to see who it was. They didn't suspect any of the women.
Why, no, they're too ladylike.
Exactly.
It had to be the hooligans.
But it wasn't, because the rocks kept falling. Within a few days, though, they did stop. But to this day, no one knows what caused it. And rocks raining down from the sky aren't just isolated to the tiny town of Harrisonville. It's happened in Italy and in New York. In 2013, the island of Sicily experienced black rocks falling from the sky, but that was easily explained by Mount Etna erupting. However, a section of Manhattan was inexplicably pummeled by rocks as recently as 2017, and there's no nearby volcanoes in downtown Manhattan. Scientists say that raining rocks can be explained by a couple of things. Volcanoes, of course, but also meteors exploding in our atmosphere. It's weird that the debris makes it down to one such small area in such a concentrated way, but that's how they explain it. As for why the rocks fell on Harrisonville 122 years ago, there's no way to ever know. But rocks might be better than meat. At least they're less gross. And yes, I said meat. On March 3rd, 1876, Mrs. Crouch was outside in her yard in Bath County, Kentucky, making soap between 11 and noon. It was a beautiful day with a clear blue sky. Suddenly, something dropped from the sky and landed at her feet. I imagine it sounded like squunch.
Yeah, meat falling from the sky would...
Flap.
Yeah, I think it would sound something like that.
I'm sure poor Mrs. Crouch did a double take as she stared at what appeared to be a chunk of fresh meat. Additional chunks of red meat fell, raining down on her in a nasty meat shower.
Sorry. A meat shower.
Yes.
Wow.
Or perhaps snowing down on her is more accurate.
Sounds kind of like a porno.
Ew, no. She's just a lady making soap in her yard in 1876? 1876. They didn't have... Stop it. It was more like snowing, as per a New York Times article said, and they quoted, "The meat, which looked like beef, fell all around her. The sky was perfectly clear at the time, and she said it fell like large snowflakes." End quote. Regardless, whether it was rain or snowflakes, pieces lay scattered all over the ground, and they were sticking out of the fence. The New York Post didn't interview her directly, by the way. They talked to her husband, Alan Crouch. I'm not sure why, if that was an 1876 thing that they just talked to the husband, or whether that was just a husband thing, but it is what it is. Curious townsfolk arrived almost immediately. Within 24 hours, Mr. Harrison Gill arrived to study the meat. He noted that most of the meat chunks were a little under 2 inches square in size, but that one chunk was as big as 4 inches square. It was his opinion that the meat was fresh when it fell, but now it was spoiled and dry.
You know what's weird about that? You would think that pretty much instantaneously there would be birds all over that, if it indeed was meat.
Yeah. Yeah, or flies or something.
Yeah.
And I think it's weird, too, that they were basically square chunks. almost like they were cut into chunks, that most of them were the same size.
Well, maybe that's what happens when these aliens are abducting our cows.
Maybe. They're done with making their pancakes.
Yep.
And they're flinging out the pieces of meat that were left over.
Yeah, they didn't want. It's like, oh, there it goes. Those earthlings will eat it.
But anyway, two men who were either extremely brave or extremely stupid actually tasted the meat. They said it was not beef at all. It was either venison or mutton. A third man claimed it was bear. Whether he tasted it or not is, I don't know if he tasted it or if he was just going on the look and the smell, but it wasn't clear. So no one had any sort of explanation for the Kentucky meat shower. But 3 months later, Leopold Brandeis, a writer for Sanitarian magazine, arrived. The Sanitarian focused on public health concerns, so it makes sense that Brandeis would show up. Luckily, someone had the foresight to keep some of the meat samples in glycerin. Or Brandeis did that himself, because, again, it wasn't clear. But he was able to analyze the samples and determine that the meat wasn't meat at all. According to Scientific American, Brandeis announced that, quote, "At last we have a proper explanation of this much-talked-of phenomenon. It has been comparatively easy to identify the substance and to fix its status," end quote. According to Brandeis, the meat was actually something called nostoc or nostoc. Nostoc. Again, I should have looked up how to say this word. Frankly, whatever this nostoc stuff is, it actually sounds a lot grosser than chunks of random meat. It's basically a gelatinous bacteria, which is also known as star jelly, witch's butter, or star slubber.
Star slubber. That's a good one.
In scientific terms, it's basically a bacteria that forms in colonies inside of a protective gelatinous sleeve or envelope. And when it rains, this bacteria turns translucent, and then it can fall from the sky. Brandeis thought that the Kentucky star slubber was made up of nostoc cranium, which is flesh-colored, and it also supposedly tastes like frog's legs or chicken, not bear or venison or mutton.
It's still not good for you. I don't care what it tastes like.
So Brandeis insisted that he had solved the Kentucky meat shower, that it was simply this bacteria that came down on the Crouch's yard when it rained. There's only 3 major problems with that theory. First, the men who tasted it said it tasted like venison or mutton, not chicken. Second, that bacteria stuff, at least all the pictures that I found online, is bright green in color, and it looks like super slimy seaweed. And third, it was absolutely not raining that day when the meat fell from the sky. Sorry, Brandeis, but you were wrong. Luckily, he shared his samples with some other experts, and they weighed in with theories of their own. One expert was Dr. A. Mead Edwards, who was the president of the Newark Scientific Association and an expert histologist. A histologist, by the way, prepares tissue samples for analysis. Dr. Edwards claimed that, in his opinion, the meat was actually meat. Sort of. He believed it was the lung tissue of either a horse or an infant child. And they ate it.
Oh. Well, you just don't eat anything that falls from the sky.
No. So, Dr. J.W.S. Arnold published an article in the American Journal of microscopy, and popular science, that he agreed that the sample was lung tissue. But he also thought that there was some cartilage thrown in there. He said they did come from an animal, but he didn't specify which kind. Eventually, the consensus in the medical field seemed to be that the meat really was chunks of lung tissue, cartilage, and muscular tissue. Which, okay, fine. That's gross, but fine. So how did it end up raining down on the Crouch property? Dr. L.D. Kastenbein had an excellent explanation for that, which he addressed in the Louisville Medical News. Are you ready for his explanation?
Yeah, I'm ready.
He said it was a direct result of projectile vulture vomit.
Oh, my God. From one vulture.
No. No. That would be a lot of vomit for one vulture. And he even acknowledged that. So he suggested that a whole bunch of vultures were flying over the Crouch homestead, and they all vomited at exactly the same time. He said, quote, "The variety of tissue discovered, muscular, connective, fatty, structureless, etc., can be explained only by this theory." End quote. So I don't know a lot about vultures, but I suppose a whole flock of them could have been attracted by Mrs. Crouch's soap making. I don't know if vultures are attracted to boiling lard and meat drippings.
I don't know, but how would they vomit something that big?
I guess they do. It is something that they do.
That really?
Yes, but the fact that they would all do it simultaneously and she wouldn't have noticed that there was a bunch of vultures flying over?
Yeah.
Seems strange. And how did they coordinate it so that they all threw up at the same time?
I don't know. I could see that maybe some pranksters in a hot air balloon, because they had hot air balloons back then at that time. I could see somebody going over and dumping meat or some substance out of the basket down. But come on, a group of vultures? I think my theory is just as good. Some pranksters in a hot air balloon, some hooligans.
Hooligans. Well, the Crouches themselves didn't believe any of these theories. They thought that the meat shower was a sign from God. But I think it's safe to say that none of those theories can be proven. Now, rocks falling from the sky and even meat falling from the sky aren't as disturbing as this next one. Blood rain. Imagine hearing a rain shower from inside your home. Maybe you're peeved because you have to go out in it and you're not really in the mood to get wet. But then imagine looking outside and seeing that the rain is dark red. It's pooling on the sides of the road like blood. It's staining the clothes your neighbor left hung out to dry red. That's exactly what happened in Kerala, India in 2001. From July 25th to September 23rd, blood fell from the sky. Well, it wasn't actual blood, but it definitely looked like it. According to Encyclopedia Britannica, on July 25th, locals heard a loud thunderclap or sonic boom and saw a brilliant flash of light. Entire groves of trees immediately shed their leaves, which appeared gray and shriveled, almost as if they were burnt. And then the blood rain fell. But it only fell over small areas, just a square kilometer or so, and the rain on either side of this invisible boundary would be totally normal. After about 20 minutes of this alarming red rain, it would switch over to normal rain. Scientists rushed to come up with explanations. Initially, the Center for Earth Science Studies wondered if it was dust particles from an exploding meteor, but they retracted their statement when the red rain didn't really travel outside the Kerala area as they expected it to. They also wondered if it was dust particles from Arabian deserts. LIDAR showed a rather large cloud of dust in the atmosphere near Kerala a few days before the blood rain fell, but it didn't explain why the rain was localized over Kerala itself. Another theory, similar to the vulture vomit theory of the Kentucky meat shower, was that the blood rain was caused by bats. India is home to some massive bat populations, and some scientists wondered if the red rain was caused by bat blood. But that theory obviously didn't pan out. Eventually, the CESS and the Tropical Botanical Garden and Research Institute issued a joint statement saying that the blood rain was caused by algae spores from a type of lichen that grew heavily in that area, although they couldn't determine how the spores were making it into the atmosphere and then coming down in the rain. Their official report omitted the fact that when they analyzed the rain dust, they found significant amounts of nickel, manganese, titanium, chromium, and copper. More recently, in 2003, a new theory was suggested by two scientists from the Mahatma Gandhi University. After studying samples of the blood rain, Godfrey Lewis and A. Santosh Kumar concluded that the particles causing the rain to be red were biological. They proposed that these biological cells were extraterrestrial. In other words, it was panspermia. In their study, they noted some pretty cool things. First, on average, 1 milliliter of blood rain contained 9 million red particles, and the particles in 1 liter weighed 100 milligrams, which means that the 50,000 kilograms, or over 110,000 pounds, of red particles fell in the rain over Kerala. These red particles were made mostly of carbon and oxygen, with trace amounts of silicon and iron. Now, officials and mainstream scientists discount the exploding meteor theory to explain the blood rain. They favor the lichen spore theory. But Lewis and Kumar, who I guess are not really considered mainstream, I mean, maybe they are, but they wondered about that sonic boom and the flash of light that the locals reported. And since the red particles are biological, their paper concluded that they may have come from an exploding meteor after all, but not the rock itself. The particles were the life forms catching a ride on the meteor. Panspermia, which is the idea that Earth was populated by microscopic organisms from outer space, isn't exactly mainstream science. In fact, it's considered kind of controversial in some circles, but it's interesting that that was Lewis and Kumar's conclusion. So, like the Kentucky meat shower and the rocks raining down on Harrisonville, Ohio, the cause of the blood rain over Kerala, India, is still pretty much a mystery. It all just makes me want to make sure I have an umbrella when I go outside.
Can you imagine? You're out there with your umbrella, and the next thing you know, chunks of meat are like just pounding on it.
Thwap, thwap.
Thwap.
It's better than blood rain. Ugh.
That is incredible. Yeah, it definitely is better than blood rain.
Yeah.
Definitely more interesting.
Did you just call my blood rain part not interesting? Is that what you just said? That the meat was more interesting than the blood rain?
Yeah.
Oh, well, thanks.
Well, to me, I love the blood rain.
It's creepy and kind of disturbing.
Well, that it is.
Especially since they really don't know what's causing it.
But, I don't know. I'd rather get hit with an unknown red rain than meat falling out of the sky.
Well, that's true. Especially if it's vulture vomit.
Right.
I wonder if they're up there as they fly over.
Kind of like the cartoons. You haven't been drinking, have you?
No.
Okay.
It's just, I don't know. It was the delicious lasagna we had for dinner. It filled me with energy. It actually made me really, really tired, but then I perked up. I had some coffee.
Nice.
Yeah. Hey, did you know? In 1997, NOAA scientists recorded a very loud and very strange sound off the coast of Chile. Lasting a full minute, the incredibly loud underwater sound, when sped up 16 times faster, sounds like bloop. Baffled, scientists scrambled for an explanation. It was a military exercise. It was a giant squid. It was a blue whale. Some even speculated that it was the sound of a yet undiscovered massive sea creature, which they pre-named the bloop. People began to imagine what the bloop looked like. The internet offered artists' renditions and origin stories. In 2011, the NOAA announced that they had solved the mystery. The bloop sound was merely the sound of an underwater ice shelf cracking. Who'd have thunk it? The bloop sound was so loud that they heard it like thousands of miles away on all of their like sonar kind of. Can you hear on so? Yeah. Anyway, their underwater equipment, they could hear it all over the place. And it was like this bloop.
Yep. I remember hearing about this a while ago.
The pictures of what they thought the creature could look like, some people's interpretations, they're pretty cool. But alas, it is not an underwater sea creature. It's just some ice. It's your turn.
Yeah, I was thinking perhaps it was a whale fart.
Yeah, that's a loud fart.
Bloop. Well, it's safe to say that nothing in my story tonight is falling from the sky, but it is equally strange.
Oh, good.
Something remarkable was happening in Leeds, England in 1806. Mary Bateman, an unassuming wife of a wheelwright, went out to collect eggs one morning from her hen and discovered something amazing, if not downright miraculous. Mary Bateman's hen could lay eggs that were inscribed with magical prophecies. The first one simply said, "Christ is coming," on its delicate shell. Now, we have to excuse the chicken, or the hen, from not knowing how to spell, because it was spelled Christ. But who really cares about spelling when a hen is prophesying about the Word of God? Understandably, kind Mary was shocked by her hen's declaration that the end of times were near, and out of concern for her fellow neighbors, she began spreading the word about her prophet hen. She dutifully collected each egg that declared a prophetic message and kept them all together. Her neighbors freaked out about the end of the world and began flocking to her house to see for themselves.
Flocking.
Seriously.
I'm sorry. Silly puns make me laugh.
I know, you have the mind of a 10-year-old when it comes to silly stuff.
Uh-huh.
Mary gladly showed them, although she too shared their concern. They'd all stand around and watch as the prophet hen popped out an egg before their very eyes, with a message written across the delicate eggshell. Since so many of them expressed fear for their mortal souls, Mary took pity on them. Since she had some knowledge of magic, she promised them that they would be spared. She charged them nothing more than a penny for her powerful protection spells, a seal inscribed with the letters JC. These seals would guarantee their passage into heaven. You really can't blame a housewife for trying to bring a little extra money into the house, I guess. And I guess you could justify it by saying that more money meant that she could take better care of her chicken. And Mary was just a normal woman, nothing special really. Mary was born in Yorkshire in 1768 to a farmer. She was a bright girl who learned to read and write pretty easily and got her first job as a servant girl in Yorkshire at the age of 13. She stayed there for 7 years before moving to York and working as a dressmaker. Now, as I said before, Mary was bright, and since her dressmaking wasn't bringing in a lot of money, or at least not as much as she wanted, she began telling fortunes and offering love potions as a side job. And she was pretty good at it. Other local servant girls, and even their employers, would come to Mary for potions to remove evil wishes that they suspected were cast upon them by their jealous neighbors. In 1792, Mary married wheelwright John Bateman, and they were living in Leeds. Together, they had 3 children. You would think that Mary would have been relatively happy, because she had a decent job, a good marriage, and she had a reputation as a pretty good potion maker. And now, she had a prophet hen. Except sweet, unassuming Mary, kind Mary, was not what she seemed.
Oh, gee, there's a shocker.
You see, John and Mary had to move around quite a bit, because Mary also liked to steal things.
Aha.
It started way back when she was a teenager, and it cost her quite a few jobs in her adult life, including that original servant girl job. An account written about her in 1811 described her as having a knavish and vicious disposition. She was caught red-handed on numerous occasions and would bribe the people she had stolen from not to turn her in. In 1796, John joined the army and Mary left Leeds to accompany him. Within a year, she was back in Leeds, doing honest work some of the time, but stealing the rest of the time. But because she kept getting caught and having to bribe her way out of it, she decided that conning people was better than outright thievery. And since people seemed to believe in her powers as a good witch, she focused on that. First, she came up with an imaginary woman named Miss Moore. According to Mary, Miss Moore was the 7th child of a 7th child, which meant she had the power to supernaturally bind anyone who caused others harm. She'd sell potions made by this imaginary Miss Moore. The potions were absolutely nothing, really, and pretty much were just a placebo effect. And that was enough to keep locals coming back for more. That worked for a while, but Mary decided that she needed to up her game, so she next created a Miss Blythe character. Mary claimed that Miss Blythe was a powerful psychic who could read the stars. Mary acted as sort of a go-between. Locals would come to Mary to ask about their futures. Mary would collect money from them and deliver this money and the person's name to Miss Blythe. In time, the fictitious Miss Blythe would come up with predictions that Mary would report to the client. Or Miss Blythe would create potions or charms for the client that Mary would pass on to them. They'd do things like ward off evil or cure illnesses. Now, of course, these charms and potions did nothing, and Mary knew it. She didn't actually have any background knowledge of herbs or tinctures. She was just throwing random things into bottles and taking the cash. She may have pushed the moral limits even further by walking the streets after a fire that destroyed homes in Leeds, begging for money to help those in need. The only person who was helped by the donations was Mary herself.
She sounds like she was a piece of work.
She was creative. By 1806, Mary heard about Joanna Southcott, a woman who was claiming to be a holy prophet. Southcott's story is fascinating in its own right, and probably a great topic for another episode. But regardless, Mary saw the Southcottian movement as her next meal ticket.
I bet she did.
Mary claimed to be a devout follower and believer. And lo and behold, Mary's hen began laying miraculous eggs with prophetic messages on them.
She knew a good con when she came up with some good ones.
Yeah, she did, and this seemed to be right up Mary's alley.
Absolutely.
Her prophet hen was her most successful con yet. And it was an absolute con. Mary was simply collecting normal, everyday eggs and using concentrated vinegar to write messages on them herself. And then she'd simply stuff the egg back inside the poor hen so that it could lay the egg in front of people.
That poor hen. It's got to feel funky coming out. I can't imagine
putting it back in.
How it feels to have it be put back in.
You think you'd break it.
You'd think. Or at least bother the hen.
Maybe there's chicken lube out there that we don't know about.
Chicken lube. It reminds me of the woman that we did that gave birth to rabbits. Because she was doing that to herself. She wasn't doing it to a chicken.
Right.
Ugh. Okay.
Now, Mary was found out. A doctor caught her red-handed. She seemed to have a problem with that, too, because she seemed to have, crappy follow-through.
Yeah, good ideas, but she wasn't very good about not being caught.
Right. She wasn't very good at being sneaky, but she was good at talking and manipulating people and convincing people that she was the real deal. So, she wasn't really punished for her scam, and to avoid the heat, she'd simply sold the prophet hen to a gullible neighbor. Now, I'm sure she had some sort of excuse ready when the prophet hen suddenly stopped laying the prophet eggs. It was around this time that a desperate couple sought out Mary Bateman. News of her potions and charms had reached them, plus her ties to Miss Blythe and Joanna Southcott. The young couple, William and Rebecca Perego, were hoping Mary could help Rebecca, who suffered from horrible frequent chest pains, a nervous disorder, and fluttering in her side that they were convinced was caused by an evil wish. Mary took them on immediately and promised to tell Miss Blythe all about them. Remember, Miss Blythe was the psychic that Mary had completely made up. She wasn't a real person. Mary reported that Miss Blythe was certain that Rebecca had indeed been cursed. Miss Blythe also instructed her to sew up bags made of silk and fill them with money. The fabric and the money had to be provided by the Peregos, of course. These bags needed to be tucked into the corners of Rebecca's bed and left there for 18 months. Then the instructions from Miss Blythe got incredibly outlandish. Mary received letters from the fake psychic instructing the Peregos to purchase silver in China and give it to Mary to deliver to her. These items were what it would take for the evil spirits to let Rebecca go. Eventually, Miss Blythe even demanded a brand new bed be bought and delivered to her. Each time Mary received a letter, she'd burn it after showing it to the Peregos, just so that the evil spirits wouldn't get a hold of them and read them. The charms to ward them off wouldn't work if the spirits knew what Miss Blythe was doing in order to banish them. It had to be a very powerful evil spirit or spirits who tormented Rebecca Perego, because despite all the charms and gifts that had been given to Miss Blythe, the couple received the following letter. My dear friends, I am sorry to tell you, you will take an illness in the month of next May, either tone or both, but I think both. But the works of God must have its course. Mary did her best as a go-between, even giving the Peregos a new magical powder that Miss Blythe instructed them to sprinkle onto all of their food. No doctor should be summoned, no matter what sort of symptoms either of them came down with. No one else should ingest this magical powder either, only William and Rebecca. Terrified and willing to try anything, the couple did as they were told, and they suffered greatly for it. William experienced a violent heat that came out of his mouth, which was very sore. His lips turned black. He had horrible headaches to the point that his vision turned everything a shade of green, and he had major stomach issues. Rebecca? Well, she suffered even more. She died in 1808. I'm sure you've guessed by now how she died. From the poison Mary had been giving both of them. It was mercury, by the way.
Oh, my God.
The thing is, this wasn't even the first time Mary had killed someone. 5 years earlier in 1803, Mary had befriended 3 women of the Kitchen family, who happened to own a drapery shop. Mary ran the same Miss Blythe scam on them, claiming to read their fortunes through the imaginary psychic and charging them for it. When one of the women got sick, Mary offered them a powder that Miss Blythe said would cure her. Mary basically was picking them off one at a time until all 3 women were dead. But Mary didn't realize that the drapery shop owed money to creditors, and when they came around to collect their money, they found the kitchen house already completely stripped of anything valuable, and several of the accounting books were missing. To cover her tracks, Mary spread rumors that the woman had died of the plague, and because people were terrified of the plague at the time, they let their suspicions drop, and Mary went on her happy way.
Jeez. She, at first I was like, oh, it's funny she's running a con about these eggs. But she was a not nice person.
No, she was a nut.
At all. She was not a good person.
She was evil and cunning. But let's get back to William Perego. Believe it or not, even after his wife Rebecca died, he continued to believe that Miss Blythe and Mary had his best interests at heart, even when Miss Blythe asked for his dead wife's clothes.
Jeez, she had no freaking boundaries, that woman.
Eventually, though, he got wise and decided to investigate. First, he dug out the silk bags that were still wedged in the corners of the bed. When he first opened them, he didn't find the money that he was led to believe was inside them. It was nothing more than bits of metal and scraps of useless paper. So, he confronted Mary right away, who refused to accept that there was anything wrong. She reportedly told him that he hadn't waited the full 18 months, and that if he had, magic would have turned the metal and paper back into the money he had given Miss Blythe to put in the bags. The next day, William came back. Mary tried to shift the blame onto him, saying that he had poisoned his own wife and was now trying to poison her and her husband. Luckily, William had been smart enough to bring along a constable who had hidden out of sight, and the constable arrested Mary on the spot. When her house was searched, police found every single item that the Peregos had given to Miss Blythe. Now, Mary's trial began on March 17th, 1809. Looking everything like a proper and respectable lady, Mary denied absolutely everything in a calm, measured way. The Hull Packet newspaper reported that Miss Bateman looked, quote, very plausible, but she had a tongue in her head that would wheedle the devil, end quote. The evidence against Mary Bateman was astounding, from witness testimony to handwritten samples. It seems Mary didn't even bother trying to change her handwriting when she wrote letters as the fake Miss Blythe. The two matched perfectly. A few bottles found in her house contained a mixture of oatmeal, rum, and arsenic. Just 11 hours later, the jury pronounced her guilty. The judge declared, "For crimes like yours, in this world, the gates of mercy are closed." He sentenced Mary to death by hanging. Mary, of course, was not going to let that happen. In one last-ditch effort to save her own skin, she cried out that she was pregnant. Now, I can almost imagine the judge rolling his eyes at this point, but he did call in 12 married women as experts to examine her. All 12 declared that Mary was not pregnant. As she awaited her sentence, good old Mary Bateman continued to make magical charms, which she gladly gave to her fellow inmates. Thousands of people came to watch the public hanging on March 20th, 1809, now dubbed the Yorkshire Witch. Mary Bateman still denied that she had done anything wrong.
Of course she didn't. She was a piece of work. Holy cow.
So there you have it. The story of Mary Bateman and meat falling from the sky.
It was a ham and eggs kind of episode, I guess.
Oh my God.
Green eggs and ham. Because that stuff really does look like seaweed. It doesn't look like meat.
I don't know. I'd have to see the pictures for myself.
I'll show you later. Yeah. It's not appetizing. Something you would want to taste for sure. But anyway, if you all would like to know more about either of the topics that we covered, you can always check our sources in our show notes as a jumping off point so that you can read for yourselves.
And with that said, I guess that about wraps it up for this episode. Join us next week for an all-new episode of Where Our Minds Wander.
See you soon.